Okay, well, it's 7 o'clock, and I'd like to welcome everybody. I really appreciate you being here. I don't need to take a long time introducing Bill. He's the reason we're all here. And looking at this audience, I'm sure you guys all know Bill's background, and it's, like I said, that's why we're here. And Jasmine has been really great. I've seen this presentation once before. She does an awesome job too. So Pennsylvania Postal History Society is really glad to host this, and thank everybody for coming. I'm going to mute everybody for now. Jasmine will be sharing her screen, and then at the end, maybe we can take some questions. I'll unmute everyone, so please be conscious that you'll be unmuted at the end, and if you have any questions for Bill or Jasmine, that would be awesome. Okay, so with that, I'm going to put the mute button on, and Jasmine, whenever you're ready.
Thanks for the introduction. So I have some images tonight, but just to talk a little bit about who I am first. I know everybody knows Bill, but you may not know me yet. My name's Jasmine, and I'm a philatelic restorer. I come to this through archives and book repair. So I started working in libraries about 10 years ago, and my favorite thing that I learned at that point was some basics of book repair. So that's something that I continued to pursue after that, and got into library school and studied specifically archives and preservation. In addition to the master's degree, I have a graduate certificate in archives and preservation, and then went on to work in a couple of historic archival repositories with historic documents. So Bill volunteered at one of those repositories, and I was working with him for a year or two, I think. And one day he came in and he goes, "Jasmine, do you know anybody who does like fixes paper stuff?" And I was like, "Well, I do some of that, Bill. What do you want to know?" I thought he had a question, and the wheels, I could see them turning in his head. And he looked very excited, and from then on, he made it his mission to try to convince me that I should go into philatelic restoration. And after a while, he succeeded, and it's been a lot of fun and very interesting, kind of a crash course in postal history. My background was in other forms of history, so I've learned quite a lot about philatelic collecting and postal history, and also, you know, continued to develop interest in and skills in different types of paper from all different parts of the world. So I'm going to show you some examples of that sort of work tonight, talk a little bit about the theory and philosophy behind restoration, things that I do, things that I don't do for various reasons, a couple of tips for you as collectors to best take care of your materials. And then after Bill gives his piece about the 6 1/4 census, which is also really interesting, I'll be interested in hearing what sort of questions you might have. So let me just pull up my images for you here. So I call this presentation the better, the bad, and the ugly. Generally, if I'm working with an item, it probably doesn't quite make it into the good category. Every once in a while, I get something that just needs the littlest of tweaks. But for the most part, things that come to me are having a rough time of it, and they need some help. So, for example, this South Asian cover came in 3 pieces. This one was kind of fortunate in that it was not actually missing material. It had just been separated. So I was able to remove some of the tape that you see on the piece to the left, and then reattach those 3 sections back together. And of course, this is beneficial for cosmetic reasons, but it also is beneficial for preservation reasons. So particularly that middle piece with the little square sort of sticking out of it, that's something that with handling would be likely to break off and potentially get lost. So by reattaching these pieces together and supporting them with some acid-free Japanese paper, it really helps ensure that this item will continue to exist in at least its present condition, hopefully not deteriorating significantly as it is displayed, as the collector might handle it for various reasons, preparing it for exhibits or just moving it around in storage. And that's really a big part of what I do, is to try to make sure that it's not all about making items look better, it's also about making them last better. So I want to try to support them, use materials that are going to be acid-free, that are going to be archival, so that as time progresses, and these items are through the course of being on the planet Earth, exposed to some amounts of light or heat or humidity, they're best prepared to withstand those changes in environment and continue to exist in good condition and be enjoyed and used as educational tools in exhibits and other contexts. So here's another South Asian cover. And this one, you can see that there's quite a bit of discoloration. So as I was repairing this one, I was pulling different colors and tones of paper so that the repaired pieces would blend as naturally as possible into the original. The top of this had also been really sort of mushed down. So a big piece of working on this one was to try to smooth that top piece back out. And if you look at the upper right stamp, you can see that a good 1/8 inch of material is above it on the right side that I was able to retrieve from where it had been sort of crunched into the inside of the item. And I was also able to smooth out the bottom as well. So this one was one that actually got bigger as I worked on it, which was sort of interesting to see. And again, the finished item is one that I would never recommend playing with your materials, but when it came to me, it was extremely fragile. When it left, it had some support to it and could withstand just your basic handling of, taking it in and out of the sleeve that it's in to maybe put it in a different sleeve or put it into an exhibit. So strengthening things a little bit is important. Here is a nice puzzle that came to me. You can see on the left, especially from the back, this was a collection of pieces. So this one of those pieces, it was exciting to discover as I took it out of its enclosure. One of them was the end of the big T on the front of it. So it was nice to be able to fit that back into place and have a little bit more of that really dramatic letter showing. For the visible chunk missing from the top, I did use, rather than the Japanese papers that I typically would use, I did use a piece of laid paper so that it matched with the texture of the item and also got it as close as I could to the color and tone of the original. But most of the repairs here are going to be done with that same Japanese paper. It is usually what I use is called kozo, which is from mulberry, and it has very long fibers to it, which allows it to be quite strong, even though it's very, very thin. So that's commonly used in conservation restoration. You go for a paper that is archival, acid-free as much as possible, and has that combination of being both thin and strong. Here's one that was primarily a cleaning operation. So I do a lot of surface cleaning. So, you can see around the edges of this, there was a lot of just kind of dust and dirt buildup. So it looks like something was sitting on top of this in the center area, but the edges of it were exposed and probably having dust, collect on it, and that starts to get ground into the paper a little bit, and it might be hard to just brush it or blow it off. So I use very specific types of erasers, and I apply them often in little granules rather than like rubbing at the paper. And that really picks up a lot of that surface dirt. Now, if you look in the upper right corner, you'll see that there was also a lot of staining. And that's something that I usually don't work on. And the reason is that staining that soaks into the paper often is creating a chemical change. And to reverse a chemical change to something, you usually need to apply more chemicals. And I work in my dining room. That's where I am now. I don't have a fume hood. I don't have what's called a washing table. So chemical work is not something that I can really safely do in this environment. So when somebody sends something to me that needs a lot of chemical or wet treatment, then I usually refer them to some conservation labs. There's a few that I'm familiar with in this region, and since you are Pennsylvania people, the Conservation Center for Art and Historic Artifacts down in Philadelphia is a great option, as well as the Northeast Document Conservation Center. But those are projects that are somewhat outside of my scope. Generally, what I'm focused on are maybe sort of the little things that maybe you wouldn't send to a lab, but you'd still really love to have them spruced up a little bit. That's kind of the place that I'm aiming for, is those things that need some care and maybe would fall through the cracks, but with the right person and the right opportunity and a little bit of time invested in them, they can really shine and be brightened up, be reinforced and strengthened, and contribute to your exhibits and your postal collecting work. Here's another nice cleanup example. What I do, of course, is not magic. So if something is as dirty as it is on the left, it's rarely going to come out looking as though it's brand new, but this one improved quite a bit. I was lucky again in this one in that a lot of that missing, or what appears to be missing paper along the bottom fold was actually just once again sort of folded inside. So rather than having to recreate a lot of that quote unquote missing paper, it was really just a matter of retrieving it and smoothing it down and then supporting those tears with some thin color matched paper to keep them, reattach them and keep everything in place. That sort of butterfly shaped hole I did fill in with some color matched paper. And then I was able to do some amount of smoothing the top fold to spread it out a little bit and make some of the writing there more visible. Here is one with my nemesis, tape. Tape is a bad word in my vocabulary, and if you like tape, stop liking tape. Leave tape behind you. No more tape ever, because tape, over time, the adhesive components of it tend to either dry out or get gummy. And either way, it's not going to be ideal for the materials that tape is on. If it dries out, it might leave behind residues that soak into the paper. So this is an example of tape that had dried out, and I was able to manually sort of chip away some of the tape that was on there, but a lot of it had just discolored the paper to an extent that it's now chemically part of the composition of this paper. So you'll have the sort of cellophane layer that might come away, and then this dried, crusty adhesive underneath, or sometimes it gets gummy and everything is just sort of a sticky, gluey mess that's now attached to this paper and very hard to remove. This is another one that on the left side was filled in with some color matching, similarly textured paper. But a lot of times in missing chunk type situations, I will fill them in with some color matched Japanese paper, which may not look identical to the original paper, but often because it's color matched, reads pretty seamlessly when you're looking at an item, and again has those properties of not having much acidity and really surviving well over time without putting the original at risk for any kind of contamination from the components of the repair paper. Sometimes I also get materials that have old like exhibit mounting stuff stuck on them or attached to them in some way. So this top one, that black card, was on there, and the collector and I weren't really sure how it was on there. It turned out that it was 2 strips of double-sided tape. Now, the fortunate thing was that the tape, I was able to very slowly remove that tape from it, which was good. But like most tapes, it had left behind fingerprints. So you can't really see it in this picture, but there are 2 faint horizontal lines across the back of this cover now, where the oily sort of components of the adhesives have absorbed into that paper. So if you came back to this cover in 30 years, I would expect to see 2 brown horizontal lines across the back of the cover. So in order to try to protect the front from additional transmission of those components that are now in the paper, all I did was insert a piece of archival plastic liner. So cut to size, just put it inside of the cover, and that plastic is not going to get brittle, it's not going to get all crumbly with time because it is archival, and it will serve as a barrier to make sure that the that sticky residue that's in the back side of the cover doesn't migrate through to the front and leave 2 brown lines across the part that is actually going to be shown and that is of more interest. And down at the bottom here, I have seen lots of covers with Post-it notes on them. And I understand Post-its are great for organizing, and you can color code them, you can put notes on them, all of that's fantastic. But make sure that you put your Post-it notes on the sleeve and not the cover itself. Because Post-it notes, even though they come off easily, do leave behind trace amounts of adhesive. And there are some conservation articles, if you're ever curious, I can share one with you that have substantiated this. So you don't want to put your Post-it notes directly on the item because they will leave residues behind, and in the short term that won't be noticeable or a significant issue, but over time that can, just like tape, can lead to some discoloration and problems. There are also other items. One time I did receive a very, very fragile cover that had a Post-it note on it, and even as gentle as a Post-it note is, there really was no way to remove that note without it taking a couple of paper fibers along with it. So you want to be really careful about your Post-its, where you put them, and from a preservation perspective, keeping your items inside of a Duralar or Mylar type plastic sleeve is always going to be helpful. You can put whatever you want on that sleeve. The sleeve will protect what's inside of it. You can stick 50 Post-it notes on there without causing any sort of problems. Now, in December, I will be doing a stamp chat with the APS called Think Like an Archivist. And in that chat, I'll be focusing on strategies for storing materials in your home and considering things like what sort of humidity do you have to deal with, temperature variations, what sort of packages should you put things in. So if you're interested in preservation and archival storage practices, then in December, I will be stamp chatting for the APS. I think anybody can sign up to tune into that. And, you know, hopefully that will be a helpful and interesting session. So at this point, we're about 20 minutes in. It's Bill's turn to talk. And then after he wraps up the 6 1/4 census, I'm interested in what questions you guys might have. You want me to pull up your presentation, Bill?
You're still muted, Bill. Just a second.
There we go. Thank you.
Sorry.
No problem. Thank you, Jasmine. Always a pleasure. Jasmine and I, about a year ago or so, while we were talking about preservation and restoration, I said to her, Jasmine, how are you with doing a census? Does that appeal to you? And working with postal historians. And I was working on a couple different exhibits, and one of the things that occurred to me, I was working on one of my own exhibits, I saw 2 covers that had the 6 1/4 convenience rate, as it's called, in the exhibit. And it occurred to me that night, in like a flash of vision, I decided that I hadn't seen any others in 40 or 50 years. And I was racking my brain saying, where are the other 6 1/4 manuscript stampless covers? And I said, man, I don't think there is too many of them. Well, I was working on a client's exhibit and I found 2 more. So that made it 4. I had 2 and my client had 2. And I said, well, there's 4. Well, that's still a small census. And I'm thrilled, though, because I'm thinking if there's only 4 in the world, my 2 are now worth a lot of money. But I got to do a census to prove that, because nobody's going to believe me that there's just 2 or now 4. So with Jasmine's help, we created a website and we started to pursue, let's create a census. Our original view was maybe we'd get to 10, maybe 12, maximum 15 covers. Well, we were in for a shock. Jasmine also helps me with the PowerPoints and the presentations, and she does this out of self-preservation because she knows in her heart that if I push the buttons and try to do this, I will mess it up. So I want you to know that we have a skilled PowerPoint website developer. Jasmine sells herself short, very humble, but she also does websites. And one of the websites she created for us on this census is the Scarce postal rate of 6 1/4 cents. And we started out 12 to 15 months ago trying to figure out where we could go to convince people, do you have any? Well, I sent out about 250 emails to every postal historian that I could think of, that I was aware of, and they started to come in fairly slowly at first, but then it picked up speed. Well, we're now up to over 100. We'll see where we are shortly. We're like at 103, is it, Jasmine? 104? So we're amazed. The good news is we've uncovered what I think is probably 99% of the world's market of the 6 1/4. The problem is what I thought I had 2 incredibly valuable covers, I proved to the world that they weren't all that valuable because there's 100 of them. So the good news is there's 100. The bad news is my 2 went down in value dramatically. Jasmine, the next page, thanks. So what did we do? We looked at the Act of 1816 and said, that's really what this is all about. There was a 6-cent rate starting in 1816 for the under 30 miles for stampless covers. And that rate stayed into effect from 1816 to 1845. And I said, well, the 6 1/4 obviously has something to do with the 6-cent rate. Well, it turns out it does. And what it is, the 6 1/4 is a rate of convenience. And that's because the currency in the United States, and they don't tell you this in the school systems in the United States about the fact that the Spanish real silver coin was really the backbone of much of our currency for most of this time period. They don't want us to know that Spain really was the provider of our hard currency. That wouldn't sell well in certain places. So we don't hear about the silver real, but that's really what this is about. And if you take a silver real coin and you divide it into pieces of 8 or bits, as in 2 bits, 4 bits, 6 bits is $1, that's what we're talking about. And 6 1/4 is half a bit. 12.5 cents is a bit. 2 bits is 25 cents, as we all know, because we're old enough to remember the phrase 2 bits is a quarter. We know that. But 6 1/4 is a half a bit. Now, why was it used and why is it on covers? Well, one of the things that we tried to determine is what's the correlation to currency? What's the correlation to rates? What's the correlation to what happened? And that's what we tried to do with this census. So, Jasmine, the next page. Thanks. So what we did is Jasmine helped me create this wonderful website. It's free. It's online. Anybody can go there. And we determined to divide it into collections and items and to talk about what happened and also recognize the people that donated information and covers to us. And as you can see, it's easy to use. You just click on the cover and it tells you everything you wanted to know. So we'll go to the first one, Jasmine. First cover, I guess. So there's 3 collections in the website. One is the private express carriers, which we've isolated out into one small little category. Originally, we included them in with all the others, but they're really a separate subject. But we've left them in the census. Then there's the banknotes, and that's currency. We're not talking about U.S. banknote stamps. We're talking about actual demand notes, banknotes issued by the banks that were also issued in the 6 1/4 cent rate. And I was most interested myself in trying to do a correlation between what banks and what towns and what post offices where the 6 1/4 cent rate was a demand note or a banknote, and also that post office also accepted and used 6 1/4 silver real bits. Well, we've only found one, and that's Tallahassee, Florida. All the other places and all the other banknotes we've accumulated, to be quite frank, there's no correlation whatsoever yet. Now, maybe over time, maybe that'll happen. For those of you that like looking at the banknotes and the postal covers, and that should be almost everybody that's attending here tonight, please keep in mind that when you want to buy 6 1/4 cent rate covers, they're going to run you in the range of $50 to $150 each, roughly. That's my numbers, not official. But the banknotes will cost you a lot more than that. So when you look at the banknotes, recognize the fact that they actually cost in the retail market a lot more out of your wallet than the covers will. Jasmine? Thanks. This was the one that started it all. It was from my collection, dated 1838. And this was the one that I had in an exhibit. And I said, wow, 6 1/4 to change the rate. And we've accepted the rate changes as additions to the census. You could leave them out, but I think that clearly says 6 1/4, and it adjusted the rate from 18 3/4 to 25 cents. So this is the one that first started me on the process of the census. Jasmine? Thanks. This is the second one that was in my exhibit, 6 1/4. This is from 1824, and what's important about this cover is this is the earliest one we have found out of the 100 plus covers so far. Theoretically, there should be some from 1816, 1817, etc. We have not found those. So the earliest known 6 1/4 manuscript stampless cover in the census is 1824. Do I think someday we'll find one earlier? Of course I do. And we keep looking. And I think a lot of collectors, by creating the census, will also be spurred to keep looking. But right now, the earliest is September 1, 1824. Jasmine? Thanks. This is a beautiful one from the famous Alfredo Froelich exhibit on Delaware. And this is Lewis, Delaware, beautiful little village. And beautiful 6 1/4 manuscript, dated 1828, so it's pretty early. Went from Lewis, Delaware to Georgetown, Delaware, not very far. Now keep in mind, one of the tests of a real 6 1/4 cent rate is it better be under 30 miles, the distance from the addressee or the post office to the recipient's post office, because if it's more than 30 miles, the 6 1/4 makes really no sense. So if it goes 100 miles, the 6 1/4 is highly questionable and doesn't really fit the mode. We've had some covers submitted to us that theoretically look like 6 1/4, but they were sent 200 miles, and we have not included those in the census. So everything in the census so far is 30 miles or less, which I think is pertinent to the story. Jasmine? It's another nice 6 1/4 from the Froelich collection. He lives in Miami, and this is from Concord, Delaware, just outside of Wilmington, to Milford, Delaware, not very far away. Very nice paid marking manuscript, 6 1/4, beautiful cover. I really believe that the manuscripts of 6 1/4 are really startling when you see one. They jump off the page at you when you see them, because your eye, and I don't care how long you've been a postal historian, you're not used to seeing 6 1/4. Jasmine? Lovely 6 1/4. This one was submitted by the famous Richard Frajola, the dealer. I love this cover. You can't get much cleaner than this one. Paid 6 1/4 from 1827, so it's on the early side, which is very nice. And it's from Waterford, Ohio to Marietta, Ohio. Now, let me digress for a second. One of the things we thought, the Spanish reals would be Florida, Louisiana, Texas. That's Spanish influence. We're wrong. It's not that way at all. The state with the most covers of 6 1/4, believe it or not, and most of you would have lost money on this bet, is Ohio, by far. I forget the exact number, but it's like 22 or 24 of the 100 covers are from Ohio. An astounding thing. Ed Siskin, very, very substantial, famous postal historian, has advised us that he thinks that 6 1/4 is really from a Canada coin of the realm and from Quebec and or Ontario, and it's really not the Spanish real basis, but from the ones from the north, because Michigan also has a number of 6 1/4, as does New York, all adjoining Canada. So the Siskin theory, which I've known Ed Siskin for 30 years, trust me, he's not wrong very often, if ever. When he says he thinks it's from the Canadian coinage, I believe he might very well be right. Okay, Jasmine? I just like saying Jasmine, by the way. 6 1/4 undercharged. Again, adjusting the rate. I love the undercharged manuscript here. This is from late in the period, 1845, because as most of you know, the rates changed in 45. The stamps came out in 47. This is from an esteemed member that's joined us tonight, Dave Plunkett from Toledo. He submitted a beautiful, beautiful Toledo CDS, beautiful cover. Happy to have this in the census. Jasmine? This is the one that submitted by Tom Lear, famous curator from the Smithsonian, now retired, living in Florida. He's become somewhat of a Florida expert, and he submitted this one. This is the Tallahassee one. This is the only cover that actually matches up with a banknote from a bank in Tallahassee, also issuing 6 1/4 banknotes, which I suggest could have been used at the post office to pay for the postage, either receiving it or sending it paid in advance. This one was forwarded. This is just a beautiful cover. You have to love this one. I'd like to have this one in my exhibit, actually. Jasmine? This is a nice simple cover with an ugly marking from Tony Crumley from North Carolina, famous postal historian, from Fort Defiance, small little post office, beautiful cover from 1831, 6 1/4, nicely manuscript in the upper right, military related colonel, lovely cover from 1831. Jasmine? This is our first banknote. We're going to show you a few banknotes just for fun. If you notice here, though, people always say, what could 6 1/4 cent get you? And Jasmine discovered this one for us. She gets excited about this one because if you read the second to last line on the banknote, it says, in mint juleps. Now, you got to like that. So what we've argued about is how many mint juleps could you get for 6 1/4 cents in June of 1837, and we've concluded that juleps is plural, so it must be more than one. And we think if you look at the value of 6 1/4 cents in 1837, which was a financial panic of Andrew Jackson, you probably could get 3, 4, 5 mint juleps from this lovely banknote from Baltimore, a hotel in Baltimore. This was my attempt at matching them up. This is another 6 1/4 Schuylkill Bank tied into the Pennsylvania Postal History Society. This is from Robert Megan, a nice judge and a wonderful exhibitor from the Buffalo, New York area. I was glad Bob contributed one of these banknotes for our viewing pleasure. This banknote, by the way, is really early. It's 1815, which is actually before the 1816 6-cent rate. So this one really raises some interesting questions. Probably worth an article by Bob Megan at sometime in the future. Jasmine? This is from the Hales Express area. They had a set price in New York in this 1844, 1845 time period. This is from Frajola, also 6 1/4 hand stamp. Like I said earlier, we had these mixed in originally, and a number of great postal historians, namely Mark Schwartz and a few others, said, now you got to separate them out. It's a different subject. And he's right. It really is a different subject. These are fees and not postal rates, and it raises an interesting dichotomy. But I couldn't leave the 6 1/4 markings out. These hand stamps are just so beautiful and tie so nicely to our subject. Jasmine? And that's the end of that part of our presentation. Jasmine and I will now try to answer some questions. I'll make up all my answers. Jasmine's answers will be truthful. I can also tell you that you should be aware of the fact
you're muted.
Bill, you went mute.
All right, let me start over. Jasmine doesn't like to advertise her services, but I'll advertise them for you. Jasmine does great work, and she's been doing this work for about 15, 18 months, nonstop, diligently. You would recognize every name of every person that has sent her covers. And I got news. If you went to the New York Collectors Club site the other night and looked at all those exhibits, trust me, Jasmine worked on a lot of those covers. And nothing wrong with that as long as you state that in the synopsis that they've been restored and they've been preserved. But don't make any mistake about it. Jasmine's doing great work. The real compliment for Jasmine's services is the number of repeat businesses and from different clients. Some people have sent her 20 and 30 covers at a time. So if you have that one, Dave Plunkett sent her one, and Mark Schwartz has sent her one or two, so on. So I want to give her an advertisement, a shout out to Jasmine's great work. When she told me she did paper restoration that day, I said, Jasmine, I think I just changed your life. It's going to get exciting. So we've had a good time with it. We had a lot of laughs, and I get to talk to Jasmine. It's wonderful. Jasmine and her husband are really nice people, and she lives only 30 miles from me. So, and she lives in Pennsylvania, in the beautiful town of Pottstown. So about 30 miles from Westchester, rounding off. So Jasmine and I will answer a question. So speak up.
Okay, Bill, I have a question.
All right.
For the last cover you showed, first of all, thanks to you and Jasmine, it was a wonderful talk. I enjoyed every minute of it.
Thank you.
But the last cover was purportedly from New York to Boston, a lot more than 30 miles. How does that rate?
Well, because it's an express mail cover. It's express company. It's not a postal service rate. It's a fee. So it's it's not the postal service.
So when we set up the website, those private express carrier covers are in their own separate category, and those are the ones that are going to be over 30 miles because they're not USPS rates of convenience. Those are the companies setting their own cost to move that item.
So the 6 1/4 is not an express company marking. It's not a
Right.
not a postal marking.
Right. Mostly, yeah, Hales Express.
So I think the answer is both. You know, it depends on the situation. The private express carriers, Bill, I think all of them have been from 1844 to 1845.
That's right.
They're pretty limited and almost all New York related.
Yeah.
Whereas
and that's the rate that they charge. That was the fee they charged for services.
Hey, thank you.
Yeah.
I think I know the answer, Jasmine. That was very interesting, Bill. Also, a lot of stampless covers all folded up. And do you store them folded up or do you store them opened? Which way is the better way to preserve them?
Jasmine?
So, you know, if your stampless cover is already folded, I wouldn't put it under extra stress if there isn't a reason to do so. So, you know, if it's folded and it's happy that way and, you know, you don't need it to be open, I would let it stay the way that it likes to be. You know, it definitely can put some stress on things trying to flatten them out, and that certainly can be done, but in a lot of cases there isn't really a compelling reason to do so. So, you know, I think I would just catalog that under like be gentle with the material. If you had an item that you really wanted to flatten, then we kind of get into questions of, you know, how willing is it to do that? Is it relatively brittle or is it fairly soft? What is the state of those fold lines? Are they really weak or splitting already? Or are they in fairly good shape? And then it's really kind of gets to a case by case kind of decision point.
I might ask that enter that if you're fortunate enough to encounter an archive of folded letters, I've done this a couple of times. Typically, they're unfolded. Well, they're not completely unfolded, but they're like unfolded to the size of a newspaper or something for storage. Because when you fold them up, they take up too much volume. Because sometimes you can see where the bugs have eaten through a part of it and not through other parts. But and that was a question. Wormholes and I guess they're wormholes, but other insect holes. Do you restore those as well, or do you leave them as is?
It depends on the item and, you know, the collector's goals for that item. I would say that by and large, most of the materials I've received don't have insect damage, but in cases that something did, it would also be a question of, you know, how fragile has that insect damage made the cover? Is it kind of lacy to a point where it really needs to be supported so that pieces of it don't start falling off? Or is it a couple of isolated spots over the surface of the cover? And then it's a discussion of how much do you want the history of that item to remain visible? There are some people who fall more on the side of, I want to show what it's been through, and other people who want it to look close to new, to kind of restore it to its original form. And there really isn't a right or wrong answer to that question. It's kind of, you have to figure out your goals for something.
The reason I ask is, well, stampless covers are easier because the paper is a better quality than what was used in the stamp period. And then when we get to stamped covers, the gum, insects seem to love that gum on, and that is I don't know how you can handle things where bugs have chewed away at the stamps and the gum and into the paper and such.
I had a question for Bill, which is, so 1847, it was 5 cents. Is that when we killed the Spanish real for paying postage?
Yeah, I think so. I can't exactly say for sure when we killed the 6 1/4 real, but the 6 1/4, they were bits of silver in people's pockets, and they were used. They were real coinage, and we have real live examples of those bits of silver. The back of that Spanish silver real, by the way, was sort of a, Jasmine, would you call it a sunburst design?
Yeah, I think you could say it had that sort of look.
Yeah, sort of a sunburst design. But that design made it very easy to see where you wanted to cut the coin into 8 pieces. So it was very convenient to design. They already laid out where you do your cutting. So I think that the 6 1/4 was an act really of convenience. People had those bits in their pocket. Now, I also can tell you, as a personal aside, I like this. After I retired from my real careers, I actually worked in a post office as a PMR. That stands for Postmaster Relief. And my job was to be the postmaster when the postmaster wasn't there. And really what it was the post office department figured out that if they hired somebody like me at like $10 an hour to be the postmaster relief, they didn't have to pay overtime to the real postmaster. So I worked a lot of Saturdays. So the postmaster didn't get paid for Saturdays. It's a little scam by the management of the Postal Service. But I did that for 2.5 years. But in that time period, I learned one important thing. Well, a couple of things. But one of the things that I learned was the post office balances its books to the penny every week, if not every day, if not every month. They are fanatical. You and I and most of the people that are watching us tonight would be amazed at the lunacy of the balancing to the penny of the Postal Service, of every one of those postal drawers, if you will, the cash drawers. It's a fanaticism thing that most of us wouldn't understand. So, 2 funny things. One, when I was the Postmaster Relief, I periodically would reach into my pocket and throw a $1 bill into my drawer so I'd never be short. So if I made a clerical mistake or a cash making change, I was never short. I was always over, because I didn't want the powers to be say, hey, Bill, you're 82 cents short this month. I don't want to hear that. Yeah, life's too short to take that kind of guff. So I periodically throw. Now, they caught me throwing the dollars in there. It drove them crazy. They said, you can't donate money to the Postal Service. I said, okay, I'll take the money out. Well, I would take it out for a day, and then I'd put it back the next day. But the point of that story is to tell you that the 6 1/4 is an accounting issue. Somebody would come into a post office to pay for the letter that was received, and the postmaster would say, well, that's 6 cents. The person would reach into their pocket, and they wouldn't have 6 cents. They had 6 1/4. They had a slice of the Spanish real in their pocket. They'd slap the 6 1/4 down on the counter. Now the postmaster, who's a fanatical to the penny bookkeeping wacko, he says, I can't accept 6 1/4 without recording 6 1/4. So the recording on the cover, either sending it or receiving it, I don't care which end of the transaction you want to talk about, is a bookkeeping thing of the fanaticism of the exactness of the postal accounting system. It's that simple. So it's there because they didn't know what else to do. If the postmaster says, I took in 6 1/4, I got to record 6 1/4. They wouldn't have been real creative, trust me. That's a long answer, but it's my best one. And I just made all that up. No, I'm just teasing.
So who makes up the shortage, the clerk or you? The clerk or the write it, or do they write it off?
No, they would actually try to bill you.
So you actually had to pay it out of pocket if you were short.
Yeah, it's insanity. It's nuts. But that's how they control things, and it's a military organization. That's for sure.
Bill, I have a question for Jasmine.
Okay, Roger.
Do I understand, Jasmine, that when there's a hole in the cover or the document and you don't have excess paper to fill it from the original, you use Japanese paper? Is that what I understand?
Yes.
And
So go ahead.
if you do so, how do you color that to match the cover? That's one question. And my other question is, can one print on Japanese paper, like on a laser printer or something like that?
So I have a stock of Japanese papers, plural, and I get them from suppliers that sell conservation supplies. So I have like a light blue, I have a couple different shades of brown, tan, I have like a brick red kind of color. And sometimes, because they're very thin, sometimes I'll like layer them to sort of further customize the coloring. But the color match, I'll choose the closest color that I have and layer as needed to get something that's really close to the original. And then your second question, I've lost as my train of thought went in the other direction.
So again, the second question was, is it possible to print on that paper an image from a laser printer, for example?
I would say you'd probably have a hard time. It's very thin, delicate paper. I don't know that it would be, I think the printer would mangle it.
If you could
I don't know that it would
if
be
you could put a backing on that paper. The reason why I'm asking is, on several of the covers you illustrated, even though the patch is excellent, the texture of the paper, of course, is flat relative to the texture of the original document. If you could scan the texture of the paper and then print that on the Japanese paper, you could practically make an invisible patch.
The other consideration there would be the components of the printer ink and how they might interact with both the Japanese paper and the original over time. So that would be something to research before attempting to introduce that sort of factor into something. But yeah, it would take some doing, but it might be possible. It's an interesting idea.
Thank you.
So when I Google you, Jasmine, it's either the Museum of Philately or the Seton Hall basketball team. So
it's not that one. I'm not.
Which one do you fit?
I am not athletic. I'm tall, but that doesn't mean I can play basketball. So it's definitely not that one. But yes, the Museum of Philately has me linked there. I can also put my actual website into the chat if anybody is interested in that.
Jasmine, I had a question for you too. I know like with stamps, from the time you start collecting, you hear about using tongs and not getting the oils from your fingers on the stamps, things like that. But how about as far as handling covers? You mentioned fingerprints on there one time. But I got to be honest. I mean, I don't wear gloves when I'm handling covers and things, and I don't really see. Maybe there's some dirt or something, but I don't see fingerprints per se. So
No.
maybe if you could talk just a little bit about handling materials.
Sure. So if you go to an archive, if you talk to an archivist, the consensus, the research-based consensus on handling paper materials is that you actually don't want to wear gloves. Gloves limit your tactile senses, and people are more likely to tear pages of books or paper artifacts if they're wearing gloves. Depending, on an item by item basis, you would wear gloves, for example, if you were handling a photograph, because then the oils do come into play. But for handling most paper artifacts, what we have people do is wash their hands and then go and do their thing. So if you're going to be working with your collection, my recommendation would be wash your hands and then, go do what you want to do with your covers and other paper collectibles.
Awesome, thanks.
Bill, Jasmine, this is Mike from the Reading and Lancaster Club.
Yeah, hi, Mike.
And hi, good to see you. Great topics. I really enjoyed them.
Thank you.
About 3 years ago, I bought about 50 covers from, something's just popped up on my screen.
This is from Roger.
You've got to share.
Sorry about that.
Okay. And amongst the 50 Queen Victoria covers was a real find. It was a letter written in Porto, Portugal during the Napoleonic Wars in 1813. And I was going to ask Jasmine what is the best way to preserve this, but I'm going to wait for her answer because she's doing that with the APS. But I do think I have a little bit of work for her because the page that was used for, if I can get this up, for the cover of the letter is obviously needs a bit of restoring. So I do have a little bit of work for you, Jasmine, that I.
Okay, well, yeah, we can talk over email and.
Yeah, that would be great. The other anecdote, this is the main letter. It's a double sheet, 4 sides, but just to share, this was a lieutenant colonel writing to his father back in England. And he starts, although I have nothing particular to mention, and then goes on and writes for 5 pages.
Must have been a postal historian.
But I would like the cover that it wrapped around and actually forms the 5th page to be restored, because this was just a fabulous, lucky find. And,
For those of you considering using Jasmine's services, keep in mind she just casually mentioned she's associated now with the Museum of Philately in Geneva, Switzerland, and we now have international clients, not just North American. So when I say the business is doing well, that's an understatement. I'd also tell you that Jasmine wouldn't tell you that she's also a college librarian currently, and she's also a professor. So you're all talking to a university professor who knows her stuff. So, I'm her advertising manager.
I think my freshmen are less impressed than Bill is with my teaching credentials.
Yeah. I just wanted these fellows to know that you would never tell them any of that.
They had to sit through a lesson on Byzantine art history this morning.
Yeah.
And I think some of them were enthusiastic. I think most of them were not.
Any other questions?
Yeah, Bill.
Yeah, how?
Hi, I have a question for Jasmine, unless it's giving away a trade secret. You were talking at the beginning of your presentation about, or showing an example of how you pulled paper into a gap and opening, where paper was pretty mangled on covers. Um, the technique of relaxing the paper to pull into a gap, how do you exactly do that?
So for most of them, it's
I mean,
really just
not just a broad way of explaining how you relax paper.
so for most of them, it's really just a matter of moving slowly and basically just sort of gently, unfolding things and putting them back where they belong. And then I use a Teflon bone folder to smooth out creases and crinkles. I have a traditional bone folder as well, but a traditional one tends to make things shiny where you've run it over, whereas the Teflon does not do that. So my Teflon bone folder is probably my favorite tool. And, I have tweezers, I have other little spatulas and things to help carefully get to spots and push them back where they belong. But the Teflon bone folder is my star material.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Good question, Al.
Bill, I have a question. If I have something to add to the census, is there? I just went on your webpage looking at the notes because I collect obsolete notes from Marietta, Columbia, and I have a couple. I have a couple of 6 1/4s.
Oh,
Do I need to? Is there an email address? I didn't see anything on the website.
Oh, you can send them to me, and I'm on the APS website under the judges.
Okay.
So go to, judges and scroll down and you'll get my email there.
Okay.
I mean,
Sounds good.
That's easy. That's easy. And you could also go to Jasmine's site and send them to Jasmine. But I like to review them first, the covers and or the notes. That way I take away some of the workload from Jasmine.
Yeah. Okay. They're just, all they are is just notes.
Okay. No, that's fine. We've included anything that says 6 1/4. We have rejected some things, though. I want you to be aware of that.
If you can use them, great. If not, not a big deal. They're all, they're dated 1816, 1817. So.
Oh, that's nice. Good. Good. I like that. Close to the start. That's good.
I put Bill's and my emails over in the chat for you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Well, Bill, the one last thing you might want to explain is for our stampless cover people.
Yeah.
Is why so many of the in that period of the 1820s and 30s and 40s. I have tons of 6 centers, but don't have 6 1/4s.
Well,
Was it lazy clerk?
yeah. No, I think that, well, maybe, but I don't think so. I think what we've really determined by some observation based on conversations that you and I are just having, you've got a ton of regular 6 centers, and we hear that from others as well. I can tell you that the 6-cent rate was for short distances, so therefore it was used a fair amount. And so there's a lot of 6-cent rate covers from that time period for sure. And it was a long time period, which adds to the quantity as well. The 6 1/4, I mean, we found 105 so far out of, I mean, how many 6-cent rate covers do you think there are if we did a census? I'm going to tell you, it's thousands and thousands and thousands for sure. You've got a bunch, and Mark Schultz has a bunch, and everybody on this website might have a bunch. So, but how many of them have 6 1/4s? And here's an interesting aside. When I started trying to figure out how many 6 1/4s there were, I asked some great postal historians like Barwis and Schwartz and Vern Morris and people like that and said, hey, you got any 6 1/4s? And you wouldn't believe the number of great postal historians who came back to me with, I've never seen one. And I went, oh, baby, here we go. This is better than I thought. Because when the big boys don't have them, Now we're talking. So I said, I got to pursue this. And I got some stuff. If you notice on our website, we not only thank those that donated material to the census, we also have a listing called basically acknowledgments. And basically, I'm saying thank you for the support. Because early on, there were people that said to Jasmine and I, go for it. This is important work and it hasn't been done, and have a good time with it. So Jasmine's bringing up the acknowledgments for me. These are people right at the top that we wanted to say thank you, including Hal Klein, who just talked, and a lot of other people who patted us on the back. Vince Costello, who's here tonight, and Mark Schwartz and others who said, hey, stick with it. This is a good idea.
Well, I had the opportunity, Bill, I don't know if I told you, to talk to Dave Phillips.
Yeah.
Prior to his death.
Yes, I know.
Concerning the 6 1/4 versus 6. And he had never seen
a 6
1/4 with 6 1/4 on it.
And he wrote the book. Yeah. Stampless cover catalog.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, I started to bump into anecdotes like that, and Jasmine and I, we said, hey, this is worth an effort. We've made it free to the public. We're not charging anybody for the information. You can make a donation to some of our favorite charities to help out. But that's just a way of saying, hey, if you're interested, help us. But none of the money's going to us, that's for sure.
Have you brought
Jasmine and
Van
I,
Coppersmith?
Pardon me?
Have you alerted Van Coppersmith?
Yeah, he's been involved. Yeah, I mean, basically everybody in the postal history world's gotten involved one way or another, either sending us stuff or telling us stuff, or saying, I don't have any. I mean, that's information there. When a John Barwood says, I've never seen one, well, now you got a whole different story in front of you, Any other questions? Well, Jasmine and I want to thank you for your attention tonight. We try to do one or two of these every month. Next month, Jasmine's talking to the APS, and Jasmine and I together are talking to the Collectors Club of San Francisco. We've just recently concluded our negotiations of start time due to the time difference. But the Collectors Club of San Francisco. Jasmine, how many of these have we given so far? 6 or 7?
I think this is number 6.
Okay. So we're trying to spread the word on the 6 1/4, and it's working. We're getting, every time we give one of these talks, somebody sends us a cover.
Yes.
One we haven't seen.
Slowly but surely.
Yeah, we call it the trickle down postal history method. Thanks, Steve, for the opportunity.
Okay. Thanks. Well, on behalf of the Pennsylvania Postal History Society, we really appreciate you guys doing your presentation tonight. I think it went very well, and we shared a lot of great information. And please check your chat window before we go if you want to get the email addresses and the website address. And I actually did set up a site for the Pennsylvania Postal History Society on the ameco.net site. And I would definitely recommend that. It's a great place for some of you guys who want to archive some of your material. If you're not real tech savvy, setting up a website, it's actually very intuitive, easy to use, and you can upload your stuff there, and you have an online place where you can send people instead of just having it on your desktop or some storage device you have. You can share things with people, and I think it's a great site. Even the free part of it, they have some paid things that have some different features, but for the average collector, I think it's really awesome as a free resource. So it's definitely something worth looking forward to. And this presentation has been recorded, and I'm going to put it up on the Pennsylvania Postal History Society site at paphs.org under presentations. So if you hear of anybody that missed it or wanted to see, see it again, or whatever, what did he say or what did they say? There's a great place, opportunity to do that. I'll have that on there by tomorrow afternoon. So thanks very much, everybody. We really appreciate it, and I hope to see you for our next presentation, yet to be scheduled, but we'll have one for you here shortly.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
Night, everybody.
Have a great night.
Great evening. Thank you.
Take care, Bill. Take care, Steve.
Thank you.
Very nice, Jasmine. Thank you. Thanks.